Can we confront security with data instead of using the BogSat method, a bunch of guys and gals sitting around and talking? Die heat maps die. They're just risk art. Let's moneyball cyber resilience from our underdog positions in GRC. Stay tuned if you want to hear more of these hooks that knocked me out of my seat and are packed with wisdom. They're from serial recovering CISO Richard Seierson. He's Chief Risk Technology Officer at Qualys, best-selling author and INS faculty member. And with GRC engineering being so hot right now, I think Richard might be one of the first original GRC engineers, having previously jumped into the CISO role at one of the earliest big-name companies that was born in the cloud. Another super hot topic in GRC right now is cyber risk quantification, CRQ. And Richard doesn't take credit for coining that term, but he very well might have. If you Google or ChatGPT CRQ right now, you can't miss his best-selling green book on it, How to Measure Anything in Cybersecurity Risk. It's required reading in the DoD CISO program. It's in the curriculum at Harvard and Berkeley. It's cited in the National Association of Corporate Directors Handbook on Cyber Risk Oversight. And by the way, that one really rips on heat maps. And I had the good fortune of getting to attend his workshop recently. He was here locally. He's coming now to Black Hat, hosting a workshop called How to Measure and Communicate What Matters in Cybersecurity Risk. But we're lucky enough to get to talk to him directly today. So Richard, thank you so much for stopping by the Simply Cyber community. How are you, man?
I am doing so very well, and pleased as always to talk to you, Steve. By the way, I hope you don't mind, small shameless plug about Black Hat. I am doing one of the keynotes, so actually on Wednesday at noon, if you are at Black Hat, come by the main stage and you'll get to hear me talk about some of these things with a real emphasis on this concept called the Risk Operations Center. I guess you'd say that might be the next big evolution beyond GRC, IRM. You know, that's the topic of the day that I'll be chatting on.
That's a very intriguing topic, getting from attack surface to risk surface and how we can elevate. I think that's a great opportunity for GRC practitioners to differentiate themselves and to add value. And, you know, we're all about launching and lifting people's careers. And I think these are helpful skills that people can apply to make an impact. So very cool. And, you know, I kind of test, you know, reading your books and harvesting your YouTube catalog. There's a lot of wisdom in there. I mean, I think if I were to consider the wows per minute of your content, I mean, it's really solid. So actually, though, I think what I'm hoping to do here is have like a mentor meeting. I've plotted out my understanding of the core concepts you've developed and you've been teaching. And I'm thinking maybe I'll show you how much I've been able to digest and you can help maybe round up my blind spots as I go through it. Sound okay?
Sounds great.
Awesome. Okay. So, you know, the goal is how to measure cyber risk. Why would we even do that? So we know that we see, you know, in the daily cyber threat briefing in the news, the perils of cyber threats and how they impose penalties and impacts on organizations daily in the news, ransomware, business email compromise, leading to penalties and, you know, financial impacts. So the CEO is going to see the headlines and they're going to ask their CISO, are we secure? And we know that's not maybe the optimal question. Maybe a better one would be, how resilient are we? Looking not just left of boom, but right of boom as well. And also that it's a pretty complicated question to unpack on a given threat or peril. And what we're trying to do is build a comprehensive program that's resilient. And so then the question is, how do you lead an organization to do that? How do you be strategic? We know we want to do it, but when you come to this table, like, what does that even really mean? And I think I really like in your book how you emphasize it's about confronting security with data and getting to measurement and kind of elevating us like, you know, engineering or accounting or pharmacy. I mean, measurement is very standard if you're controlling a process. And to be strategic, we have no choice but to do this. And frankly, to be resilient and to get the good outcomes, we need to quantitatively measure risk. I don't know, how am I doing so far, Richard? Would you articulate kind of the mission before we get into more details? You know, how is it resonating so far?
I'm still stuck on wows per minute and thinking about that as a metric. No, you're doing great. You're doing fantastic.
Cool. Okay, yeah, and like we're just kind of scratching the surface. I think that it's well understood, or people aspire. I certainly do. Like I'm not there yet, but I want to get there, to be as quantitative as you've gotten. And it's a real challenge. And just like this concept of, you know, people, what does it really mean to be a strategic CISO? It's obviously a good thing, but I mean, what does it mean? I think as we go through the details, we'll try to unpack more actionable insights on how to actually do this.
Yeah.
And a great example, actually, it was Rob Black, the fractional CISO, who first recommended your book, and that's why I read it. And he has this joke about in finance they don't say revenue this quarter is high, and and in CISO you can't say I need $200,000 to spend because risk is high. I mean, that's not the language of business. So how can we be like a CFO or a chief revenue officer in talking the language of business? The problem, of course, is cybersecurity is hard. There's so many reasons. Each domain is a profession in itself. It's complicated. It's the data that we want, we don't have. Fortunately, and this is where you come in, and Doug Hubbard with your book, everything is measurable. You just need to understand what concept, objects, and methods are about, and it's actually shocking to find you might have more data than you think. So, is that right, Richard? And can you maybe unpack why that's the case? How do you solve this? Cybersecurity is hard, and I can't be quantitative with actually everything is measurable.
Okay, sure. No, that's a great and deep question. So I'll just give you a little bit, let you respond, and we can do a little bit back and forth.
Sure.
So I use this quote a lot by Kettering: "A problem well defined is a problem half solved." So when someone says, cybersecurity is hard, or measuring cybersecurity is hard, assuming that they're willing to have a conversation with me, I want to understand, well, what is hard about it specifically and what stops you, right? So I want to understand. Typically, what people will say, well, it's hard to get the data. And this then goes back to the principle which you already shared, which is one that Doug shares, which is one that I actually echo as well, which is you have more data than you think, and you need less than you think, right? If you start with, I need all the data to be able to forecast the future perfectly, first of all, that there's some logical fallacies there. The future is highly uncertain. It doesn't even exist yet, right? It's always the now baby. And you're really now you're like getting into fortune telling or being an astrologer. That's not what we're trying to do with measurement. And now I'll just say this and I'll let you respond. When we're using measurement, and really when we're doing, they call it predictive analytics or forecasting, whatever term you want to use, the idea is this. Look, there's some data generating process. Maybe it's something associated with vulnerability management. Maybe it's something associated with identity. Maybe it's in my SOC. Maybe it's even something from a regulatory perspective. But the reality is historically there's been some phenomenon that emits some sort of data. We want to measure that to a certain extent. And when we don't have a lot of empirical data, we do use expertise, meaning experts who know something, right? And we use that because what we're trying to say is, hey, look, how might that thing behave in the future? And really what we're saying is, what are the plausible parameters of that behavior in the future? What I'm not saying is, I want to know exactly how that thing will behave, what the exact outcome will be at this specific time, at this specific day in the future. If that is your objective, listen, if scientists had that objective, we actually probably wouldn't even have penicillin today. That's not how things work in the real world. That's not even how your business forecast, a publicly traded company, makes forecasts about the future either, where they do quarterly calls with investors and whatnot. That's not how they operate, and certainly we shouldn't operate that way as well. So again, a problem well defined is a problem half solved. What is the objective? What is it we're actually trying to get done? I think if security folks spent more time pen testing their own hypothesis about what they're trying to get done, there'd be a lot of value. I'll stop there and let you respond.
Yeah, no, I think that really resonates. It makes a lot of sense, and we're gonna unpack all those details. In fact, because you kind of just scratched the surface, and the way you break it down. Now, I wanted to add a layer. So I think one of your core concepts from your workshop is that, Steve, everything I write, everything I do, it all ties back to this concept, object, and method. I think I want to hit that right off the top. But before I do, just talk a little bit about, well, this is from you right here, but talk about how strategy is how I get from my current to desired state. And in security, we have our different functions and our outcomes we want to achieve, and we want to get, I like your line, snap a chalk line of measurement. That's awesome. And I want to understand security outcomes and how can they be better, and I get there with my strategy and I have tactics, and then you get a lot more detail and quantitative, kind of cascading down into an objective, a goal, and strategy and tactics. But I think before I get to concept, do you consider that in the concept bucket to be measuring the
Sure.
right thing? Do you?
Sure, sure. Well,
Okay.
let's go back to you. You actually started out with the concept of strategy. So I want to lead with a quote and then talk about the COM model, and then we can get into the other. I think it's really useful. So my favorite hacker in the world, Sun Tzu, he said,
Yeah.
he said, tactics without strategy is the noise before defeat. So I'll say it again. Sun Tzu said, tactics without strategy is the noise before defeat. One of my favorite quotes. I use it in training a lot. Now I'll talk about a modern day strategist, Roger Martin. For those of you who don't know him, uh, arguably the most prolific and perhaps most important strategist, business strategist alive today. Quoted a lot in Harvard Business Review, a lot of stuff on Medium. So I encourage you to read him. And
Grew up
so he
not
did.
far from me.
Oh, great. Yeah, he's great.
Integrative thinking.
And
He's awesome.
he's great. And so, you know, he defines what strategy is. And I like talking about this because a lot of CISOs are asked to be strategic, but they don't know what that means, right? And in fact, I had when my first, it was my second actually publicly traded CISO gig. One of the board members told me. I asked her. I said, "Hey, you know, what is it that you're really looking in a CISO? This is great for you folks who are looking to get CISO jobs. If they say they want a strategic person, ask them. Well, what would you see me doing that would let you know I was being strategic?" And she said, "Oh, because they wanted strategists. They said, oh, I'd see you doing strategy." I said, okay, well, but what is that? And she goes, well, you'd be strategic. And it's not that she was dumb, not at all. They knew they wanted something different, but they can't tell you what strategy is, but I can. I will tell you what strategy is because I'm just going to steal it from Roger Martin because he really knows what it is. But strategy, and you got the right picture up, strategy is about making trade-offs, economic trade-offs typically, with your peers where those trade-offs hurt. I mean, someone's going to get something, someone's not going to get something, right? So you're looking at what the business is trying to get done, like in this picture here, and you're having to make hard choices. Typically, we're like, all right, I may have to give up some things to get some things. If you're doing that and you're doing that in conjunction with your peers, you're doing strategy. But you, CISO, if all you're doing is living in your world, thinking about how you're going to get money on your budget to spend on your things, to get shiny things so you can keep your staff happy so they don't leave, and how you can be able to talk to your peers about how big your budget is and all those other sorts of things. If you're doing that, you're being purely tactical, right? But that's not the job of the CISO, right? And so again, you're being strategic if you're making trade-offs. Now this leads into the concept and object and method of measurement, which is Doug, right? By the way, you notice how I'm borrowing from everybody. I'll borrow from Shakespeare right now. Necessity
Hoist
is
my own
the
petard.
yeah, necessity is the mother of all invention, and I'll add to that. And boredom is its father. So that's where we've got to here with this idea of measurement is necessity. So what is the concept, object, and methods of measurement? So I mentioned this before to you, but the concept of measurement, I'll just say for the layperson, and going back to the data concept, it's about making trade-offs. It's about trade-offs between accuracy and precision. So when I say precision, we lean in security folks, we want all the data. We want it all right now, continuously. We want all perfect data about it, perfectly everything about now, in the past, and the future, right? There's all kinds of wrong with that, but scientists don't operate this way. But I want all the data, right? Perfect data. That's precision. You can be perfectly wrong. Accuracy is about being generally correct, right? And we want to have a balance between accuracy and precision given what we stand to lose, or what the business stands to lose. Now, that's really important. Going back to that picture you showed before, I need to understand, what does the business stand to lose? What does the business stand to lose in terms of, let's say, opportunity loss? For example, a lot of the impact with the Marks and Spencer breach had to do with business disruption. That was over 50 days of disruption impacting their cloud service. They're obviously they're a retailer. They're Global 2000, right? Big retailer, and so they had opportunity loss impact. They lost upwards of, so they say, this is them, 400 million. They had about 130 million in insurance limit. Obviously, losses spill over that. A lot of that is going to be covered by their capital reserves, cash, but they had opportunity loss was a big driver for this. So again, I need to balance my data needs between accuracy and precision so that I can make sure I'm doing the right things, or that I do the right things given what I stand to lose. So I'm going to argue that the most important thing on the concept of measurement really is that balance. And you have to be working it backwards from what you stand to lose. Now that gets into now you're leaning to the objectives, objectives of measurement, what we stand to lose, right? Because what our job is to keep risk within what the business can tolerate. Again, going back to what you stand to lose. So if you're not working backwards from what we stand to lose, you're not really understanding how to measure, or how to balance accuracy and precision. What I'm going to say is you're going to default to this tactical concept of, I'm going to buy things. I'm going to buy all the things that the various analysts say I should buy. I'm going to buy the things so I can make sure I retain my staff because they want to use all the new things and shiny things. I'm going to buy things so that I look like I'm doing something to the CFO. This is purely tactical thing. I'd say it's maybe not even tactical. It's more activity. It's heat generation. You're like a glorified purchasing agent at this point. That's the definition of you as a CISO. This is really bad, right? So again, tactics without strategy is the noise before defeat, is the definition of defeat. Concept of measurement, we want to balance the need of accuracy and precision, always driven by what the business stands to lose, getting the objectives. Then having done that, we can then get into the methods and all that other stuff. So I know that was a lot of words, but I just want to say, by the way, another shout out to Sun Tzu, my favorite hacker, and Roger Martin. You should be reading those cats amongst others, and obviously reading Doug as well.
I think we're going to get along just fine. So they're very aligned to my catalog. And it's when we start talking about GRC work and risk assessment, I want to get to those methods, right? And so I think that's so interesting that you really set the stage first before getting into the subject at hand of measurement approaches, which is the big question I have, and how I'm trying to remove barriers. It's just like, well, you better direct those at the right things so that you're going to get the good outcomes.
Can you go back up to, you had that slide where I had penalties on it?
Yeah, sure.
You're going to go up a little further, that flow diagram. There you go, that guy. Make it a little bigger. See that thing, penalties? So for GRC, and I don't know if this is obviously this is a thought experiment. It's kind of an infographic. It's not everything, by the way. It's just a way to have a conversation. But these are very useful distinctions. And these are distinctions that cut across security, GRC, insurance, what have you. But the idea of penalties. GRC, so when you think about losses that happen because of cyber, a lot of them happen here because of penalty, things that get enforced upon you, right? So if you have a data breach, for example, you can have regulatory, civil, and criminal impacts, and there's going to be enforcement actions that happen from this, by the way. Money that you're going to spend, what we call them penance projects, but there's going to be, I forget who it was, that said, it's great to be a post-breach CISO because you get all this budget. That budget is coming a lot of times, that's coming from enforcement actions. There are things that now cruel and unusual things that the business has to do, right, because of regulatory, civil, criminal, either because things happened or the threat of those things as well. So again, I'd even go back to the GRC. If GRC is starting with just tactics, we're going to go and we're going to get all this audit evidence, we're going to do all this stuff, we're going to churn, but you're not working backwards from what you stand to lose, looking at penalties and enforcement actions. I'm going to argue that you are not a strategic GRC person, right?
Absolutely.
Useful, I suppose, but someone would say, well, I don't know all that stuff. Well, I'm going to say, if I were your CISO, I'd say, but that's what I hired you for. I'm going to get a new one now.
That's right. Okay. Well, certainly we consider regulatory risk, compliance risk, contractual risk in our suite that we're managing, and I guess in addition to paying that fine, you're going to have the FTC if it happens to be they thought you had unreasonable cybersecurity. I think you need to report them for 10 or 20 years, and it's just another drain ongoing. Maybe you got some. Anyways, there's a lot there that can.
It all works. It all works together. You can have losses that don't go through penalties. I obviously you're going to have things that don't have any regulatory impact at all. Yet that's why it's kind of just passing through kind of transparently. I was trying to figure out a way. There's probably a better graph for this, but I just want to talk again, even with you're on the GRC side, because I was talking about. You might think, Rich, you're talking about purely security. No, so the industry at one point in time created this term called GRC, and then Gartner has tried to push this term called IRM, and now ServiceNow has adopted the IRM term, and people have all their different words, whatever. But we have to always work backwards. Like, what is it we're trying to do? We're trying to make the business resilient. I'm talking about business resiliency at this point to plausible future losses of all classes. What we want to do as a leaders, I want to be able to say, hey, look, we've got a strategy in place that's trying to anticipate plausible future outcomes, and we're trying to invest in such a way that should we incur, they could be multiple deleterious, multiple bad things that are happening, but we're still going to be able to meet our obligations to our stakeholders. That's just really what business is about. It's like, hey, look, in the case of Marks and Spencers, they're able to do that, by the way. They've got a great cash position, so they're in a good place. Would they have rather transferred more of that to insurance? Hindsight being 2020? Absolutely, particularly, it would have been super cheap, NX ROI on an investment in transfer. We also are starting to know a little bit more about controls. The reality is that there was some opportunities for capital efficiency, but end of the day, cash position, from capital reserves, what you've done with insurance, what you've done with the controls, the idea is even if bad things are happening to us, we want to be in a position to continue to provide services and value to our various stakeholders. That's the objective long term.
Protect and enable. We're here to enable these outcomes. So you've hit on accuracy and precision, and this tells you pretty quickly that if you're hitting the wrong target or you're not on the right dartboard, that money you spent on your business intelligence platform and your data lake wasn't spent very well.
Lower left is very expensive.
The most expensive, eh? It's worse than random, or worse than doing status quo.
Precisely wrong. Yeah. Happens all the time.
Oh, I'm like, am I precisely wrong? Okay, no, I was right.
Oh, no. You have the image up, and I was, for those of you who are just listening, I was commenting on the image, not on the interviewer.
I gotcha. And then you mentioned this quote here. Oh, I have an idea for your next book title, because you said in your book, "Am I covering my assets?" How about that for a book title? Cover your assets with a T in parentheses.
that's very clever.
Due diligence and due care. Yeah, not my original. I think even as a colleague in legal, but I do think, if we look across a security organization, the red team's got that cool job building and breaking things, and mad respect for their skills to do what they do. The blue team is the backbone and the engineers protecting us, and they're the tip of the spear responding as well. So important. I think in GRC, in supporting those teams with our complementary skills, due diligence and due care is a big part of our value proposition, and it's no joke, right? And so makes sense. And then also to show that we're improving with any process, that's why we want to get to measurement. So now, if I want to, improving it better, you take a baseline and you start measuring. And to understand, I guess, what to measure, we start with a definition of risk management from you, and you broke it into two pieces. So piece one is it's an ongoing, continuous identification of risk. So if you have your head in the sand and you don't understand your threat landscape that's changing, whatever else you're doing is not good. And then once we are threat aware, orchestration required to bring excess risk within tolerance. And so brings up some questions of, well, first of all, is that true? Are those the two components that you see of risk management?
Well, that's what Rich says, right? But the audience needs to know that I don't invent anything. I'm just an observer, right? So let's just think about this. If you work for a successful business, I hope you do, by the way. If you work for a successful business, that business is in the business of continually exposing more value to more people through more channels at higher velocities with the hopes of more revenue and more profits. Right? I'll say that again. A successful digitally and AI transforming business is in the business of exposing more value to more people through more channels at higher velocities with the hopes of more revenue, more profits. The baker's got to put more cakes in the window to get more people to come into the shop, right? That's how this works. That's how the world works. So you already have a data generating process here, a risk generating machine. It's called your business. It's continuously doing this. It's not, it's not taking a break. And then the other side, you have artificially intelligent and sentient bad guys who never rest. I mean, look, you have angry packets flapping against your firewall all day long, 24/7, where people are trying to see if you have any low-hanging fruit, so they can do opportunistic steps. And they're also sending all kinds of stuff through phones, through email, through all kinds of channels to your employees and your third parties. This is happening, it's continuous. And so it's an observation that obviously if the context is continuous and it is hyper-continuous, you would have to be in the business of continuously identifying risks that would result in intolerable losses. So I would just say this is just an evidence-based observation and entirely unclever. Okay, so there's that. Okay, and then on the other side, orchestration to bring risk with intolerance. Yeah, you should be bringing risk with intolerance. If your job is to eliminate risk, I don't know that makes. We can talk about that if you like. Why that doesn't make sense. If you call, I covered that in my session. But the idea is to bring it with intolerance. Now, a lot of people might say, "Well, Rich, that's a very ivory tower of you to bring up this idea of risk tolerance." Everyone who's ever done real work for reals realizes that no one knows what that is. You can't go to your CFO or your CRO and say, "What's our risk tolerance?" And I would say, "You're wrong." I'd say you're wrong.
You do the best job that I've seen, or that I've encountered being an accountant coming into cybersecurity, because you gave me this baby. Like that's
Well, that's a great way of measuring. That's a great way of measuring it. But I'm going to argue that your risk tolerance is already defined, and they've been doing it before security even existed. So first of all, your insurance, the insurance policy that you buy, be it self-insured or otherwise, you're buying essentially a limit on your insurance. You limit, your insurance policy is a mathematically unambiguous, contractually obligating in a court of law expression of risk tolerance. It is absolutely an expression of risk tolerance, and that limit is a firewall put in place by your money people to prevent unexpected losses from spilling over into cash. You're an accountant, I'll just tell you, this is true. That's what it is there for. It's like, I'd rather spend this money on my premium. That's a much better ROI than letting these losses go and hit cash. But there's a limit. That's why it's called a limit. There's a limit on how much I need, either I think I need or that I can afford or that I can get. Because sometimes insurance will say, "I'm not going to give you any more." All right, but then your capital reserves, which is under your CFO, you have this organization called your treasury, whatever it is. There is cash on hand for unexpected either opportunity and or catastrophe. That it's there for a purpose, right? And so it exists there. This is all about making the business resilient, right? That's what it's there for. So again, you remember, I don't
keep operating if it takes a hit.
Yeah. Again, Richard does not invent a thing. I'm an observer of what's already occurring. I just tell stories about it. So when someone complains and says, "Well, we don't know what the risk tolerance is," I'm like, your business has been doing this. They've been doing risk tolerance stuff we're talking centuries. It already exists. You just need to, get out more. So it already exists. So that's the thing on tolerance. So the idea though is then, and by the way, your CFO is interested in giving controls. If you're talking to an informed one, is like they actually don't want to deal with your insurance because claims go on. Going back to the idea you had of long things going on for a long time. The claims tail can go on for 5, 6, 7, 8 years, depending on what happens legally, whatnot. You can have this thing that just continues to go on. So they want controls in place. That's a firewall to keep you from having to exercise insurance, which they prefer not to do. And insurance is a firewall to prevent, this is defense in depth from a business perspective, to prevent you from losses from crawling into cash. And by the way, yes, there are things that go beyond cash. That's where you have to start selling stock and doing RIFs, right? You don't want to do that. These are the layers of defenses. And so we just, as a GRC person, we need to observe all of this and understand where we fit within that ecosystem, what controls mean, and what is a what is a maximized or optimized use of controls given all that. Sorry, that was a lot of stuff. I know you get this, but it's good for the audience to hear.
I'm not. That's fabulous. I know it is reinforcing my understanding here, and I think actually I've heard of expense in depth. Like I think Stuart McClure wrote something like an intro letter in here, but I was at my company with him for a bit. But he had, I think we got from them the term expense in depth in terms of talking about this. But you had another one I hadn't heard: countless other security things, costs. You know.
By the way, shout out to Stuart. He's a good friend. He's great.
Exposed.
He wrote the foreword to the first edition of that book, and it was him and Dan Geer. I don't know if you folks know Dan. He's arguably the past generation, probably the most important thinker on security in general. But yeah, both great guys. Stuart's I'm a big fan.
Same here, and I'll have to look up the other name you mentioned. So we know that we need to buy down the risk with controls, and that see where that goes. And there's all the things in the data mart, right? Because we have all this telemetry from all these sensors because security is complicated. All right, so we got through the concept. We're moving into object. We want to snap a baseline. That's the B in Boom. And then we need, and then what, you've heard before, not you, Richard, but anyone, it's just like, I want to know the trend. What was the year on year, the quarter on quarter, the month on month? Performance against target. That certainly tells a better story than just sending data somewhere. If you have a narrative and a story to tell in your monthly or quarterly presentation on top 5 risks and our activities, our compliance posture, that sort of thing.
Yep.
And when you compare to a target or you compare to a baseline, you can be getting better, you can be getting worse, faster, slower. So that was very helpful to understand why that's important. And then you get into, well, what should I measure? And it can be coverage, configuration, or capability. And I tried to take my kind of go-to metrics and put them in those categories. And I wonder how well I did. But I guess just to touch on this, we want coverage of depth and breadth. Well, you'll see them in practice here. That would be, I think, scan coverage. My vulnerability scanner, scan recency, agent coverage. I could have an XDR, a vulnerability agent. I could have a variety of things. Mm-hmm. Are our cloud instances tagged properly? Like, I think my cloud inventory is accurate because I pay every second of every instance. But do I know who to contact for every instance? And do I, so how is our tagging hygiene? So, and anyways, this is how I see coverage. But how did I do here, Richard? It felt like a leap for me.
Looks great. Yeah, no, it looks great. I mean, great. Listen, everyone should do coverage. I think a lot of people who do metrics are doing coverage metrics, and you should. It's table stakes, and yeah, it's great. Motherhood and apple pie. Go do your coverage.
And when we get into, I think one of the things I wanted first when I came across your material was like, could you just give me this pick list of metrics? But it can range from 5 to 250. So I think yeah.
This is why some people hated my second book. In fact, I was just on a call. I was just on a call with a spaceship company. I won't name who they are, with the CISO and their team. And he said they're all scientists, right? They're all like STEM and like super smart PhDs and whatnot. And like 20 people on the call. And CISO was like, yeah, your green book, that was hard, but we love it. He says, but we really love when we've implemented your second book. I'm like, oh, okay, you're the other fans of the second book, like, because because it's full of engineering math stuff. Well, actually, it's full of engineering computational stuff. It was all in R, but they loved it. But there was someone on the call though who said, can I have the pick list of measurements? And what is the standard pick list? And I said, I'm going to tell you something, and this is going to be very dissatisfying for you. And I encourage you to be a skeptic. You can tell me that I'm lying. I'd love for you to come back and tell me I'm wrong on this. I said, any of the pick lists that are out there for metrics are awful, and I think they'll make you worse than doing nothing. They're not
Mm.
ambivalent. Even the CIS has a version of metrics. There's other books as well. I said most of them are awful, awful, awful. And I said I've done this is a through IONS. I've done like 1,000 calls on this, right? Mostly Fortune
Yeah, I
1000.
bet.
I'm
That's what I would
traveling. I'm
ask.
a traveling. Yeah, yeah. And I said I feel like I'm kind of an authority on this. And I said I think I know you want this. I just know every bone in your body wants me to give you a pick list of metrics, and you're going to hate me for not doing it, and you'll think I'm a liar because I saw people complain on Amazon about my book. But I said, I just don't believe in it. I just don't believe in that. I believe what's important is you need to understand what your business stands to lose. You need to understand what's the value at risk. You need to understand what are the capabilities you've deployed, and then you need to ask some questions. Well, what would I see occurring specifically, mathematically and unambiguously, that would let me know this capability is being efficient in managing the risk that would have an impact on my value risk? And you don't want to think that. You don't want to go through that work. I know you
That's
don't.
right.
It's
That's the
hard.
thing,
I know.
is that it's
I know it's hard. But I'm going to tell you, I'm opening the door for much more fun. Don't you want to have more fun?
right.
Aren't you? Or you must be bored to tears, right? You have to think about this. You want to, if you just want a list, you can do it. Time and time again, I've met with companies that go and implement, they go and they build a data warehouse. They spend millions of dollars. They hire a development team and they do the list. They get all the right metrics and they get hacked and they have losses and they don't understand why. Because they were so busy generating heat and purchasing stuff and tactics. It is the again and again and again and again. Tactics without strategy is a noise before defeat. And just doing metrics without thinking about what you stand to lose is a surefire way. You can look important, you can feel good about yourself, you can tell people about all your great metrics and your data warehouse and all that stuff. But if you haven't gone through the process of understanding what your objectives are and what you stand to lose, you've done nothing. Well, no, you've done worse than nothing. Again, it's not ambivalent. So I'm going to argue there really is no pick list. Now, you can go look at what other people have done. There's some books out there, and you can look and get some ideas. But I'm going to tell you, it can poison your mind. You have to work backwards from what is this thing that we're protecting, and the capabilities that you are accountable for investing in. Are they capitally and operationally efficient at eliminating the risk, right? Again, because their job operationally is to bring that risk back within tolerance. That must be what it is. If you're going to say, Rich, that's too hard, I don't want to do that, no one else does that. You know, everyone used to do bloodletting going back even to ancient Egypt. That was the practice. Everyone did bloodletting. Occasionally, now listen, we still use leeches on occasion in modern medicine, but no one does that anymore. Don't just because a billion served doesn't mean that it's good for you to eat that, right? All right. Okay, sorry.
Well, I think that is actually, so as someone who went through the trough of disillusionment looking for the pick list and where isn't, and I think that's a really good answer though, is to say, well, actually you need to put in the work. Like I can take you so far, but now you need to do it. Now, your colleague was talking about, in a talk with you, decomposing risk from the financial statements. Okay. So I thought that was interesting. And, is that, you talk in your book about decomposing from an impact perspective, but would it make sense for me in starting on this journey to start with my revenue and cost drivers and then to maybe the systems and data sources for those and go that way, or any tips in that context?
Sure. I mean, listen, for public companies in particular, part of the thing that they're trying to do is make sure people understand how they make money, right? Yeah, so investors know. So there's a lot of public OSINT information out there about how
That's
companies
true.
make money. And the reality is to the extent possible, you can decompose that, meaning, you may have, I was just on with can't name names, but yesterday I was on with the head of IT risk and compliance for a multinational engineering org. They're a Fortune level company, and their business decomposes into regional financial buckets. By the way, that's how our company does as well. And they do look at risk to revenue. That's when there might be other ways. Maybe you're looking at risk to cash. Maybe there's something else that you're looking at. When we work with government sorts, they'll look at risk to mission. By the way, eventually, if you talk to them, eventually, guess what? It gets the money. Surprise! But anyway, so they say, "Oh, we don't use money." and we'll start talking, and they're like, well, you didn't do that because it costs money. I said, oh, do tell. Yeah. So you didn't get you. You're telling me in government you don't have things like budget cycles? Oh, we do. It's awful. I said, yeah. You can keep talking about risk of emission, but that's a proxy for money. It always is. So, anyways, yeah. By the way, Jonathan Troll, I'm another big fan. I put him up there. He's like CISO. He's our CISO. Really like him. He ran all the Fusion Center for Microsoft. He was the CISO for the state of Colorado. Bunch of other stuff, and he's our CISO, and I couldn't be prouder.
Right on. Well, yeah, it was very insightful talk, and I think that guidance as well was helpful in thinking of where to start. I put other ones under configuration and capability, but I can't believe how much time has elapsed, and we've come this far. You can really deep dive into this stuff. So I will, zoom out a little bit. Objectives, part 2, trend and target. Okay, we've touched on that. 3 measures. This was really cool. Whatever my barometer is, I'm looking at a risk arrival rate, a burn down rate, or a survival rate. And
yeah, that real quick, I take us again. Richard does not invent anything, right? I'm an observer of the world. Security is a system. From an engineering perspective, in particular, it's a system. So there's a rate with which things come into the system. Like in this, we'll call it risks more generally. I need to understand the volumetric. How's that changing over time? If you work for a successful business, you are a risk generating machine, right? And I want to understand how the rate with which risk is exiting. And I'd argue also I want to understand something about how long it tends to stick around. And so, I mean, that sounds normal. I mean, you went to someone who doesn't know anything about security, say, yeah, well, I got this thing. I want to understand the rate with which things come in. I want to understand the rate with which things exit and how long the things that I care about stick around. They go, well, you sound like a normal person. I say, well, thank you. And so that's what I want to measure. So when I train people on metrics, we start there, right? Arrival rate. So there's all kinds of count-based measures. The departure rate really is a combination of arrival, the rate with which things arrive, and the rate with which they exit. We create a ratio over time, which is burn down, and then we use standard survival analysis or engineering failure analysis to do survival stuff. And my contention is that those 3, and by the way, it's very efficient. You only need 2 columns of data. You have a first time stamp and a second time stamp. And with that, and maybe a little more sauce as you progress, that's all you need to do metrics. So the good news is metrics are not that hard. It's not hard. Yeah, it's right there. It's not hard. The hard part is the thinking part. It's not the methods. That's why it's the order of COM. But everyone puts the cart before the horse, and they get so enamored with methods. They hire data scientists and all these people, and they spend all this money, and they do amazing things and buy all the data warehouses, and it's super exciting and fun to talk about, and they're not helping.
Yep, didn't have the precision needed. Very cool, man. I love how things are. It's clicking for me. I'm getting there, right? It's a lot, but I think putting it in the sequence and laying it out and getting your, real-time input. I'm excited that I think I'm closer to the right track than I've been to this point. So that's cool. So
it's a much more fun way to live, helping people and measuring the right stuff. It's more effective and much more fruitful career. Trust me.
Well, that's exciting. Like, this is proven stuff that is going to work. And we can be qualitative or quantitative. You caution against the dangers, frankly, of going to qualitative, which is enumerated here. I thought it was interesting. Go ahead.
If I did, maybe I was being contentious. Listen, you can't. The qualitative versus quantitative distinction. I know that we do this, like in the social sciences and whatnot. I get it, but end of day, it's pretty hard to untangle those things, right? So it really is, because oftentimes people what they're really saying if you talk to people and you kind of pen test their ideas under the hood, they're really talking about this thing of subjectivism versus objectivism. That's kind of what they're getting at, really, right or wrong. And the reality is, someone might say, "Oh, we're purely quantitative." Well, for example, the things that you choose to measure are coming from a qualitative or a subjective space, or hopefully some space of expertise. All right. But even the things you choose to measure and the words you use to call it and where you're getting the data and all those choices, there's choices you're making, which you can call it qualitative, subjective, whatever. It's pretty hard to untangle these things. If I were to really beat on something, if I were really to beat on something, is back to your original thing. If I were to say, hey, I'd like to be paid high, "Oh, what do you mean exactly? Well, okay, you're negotiating now. I see it. I'll go medium high. Pay me medium high. What's the number? Oh, you are a hard customer. Okay, I'll go high medium.
Right.
Well, what do you mean? I'll go red hedging on orange. I want a number. No, no, you pay me orange. I see you're a tough customer. I'll keep negotiating with you. Like that. Who does that, right? That's fine. By the way, we scoring is for rank ordering our operational attention. We use scores. We know ordinal values
Yep.
are super useful. They just didn't sign up as measures of financial impact. They didn't sign up for that. They never committed to that. And they never committed to be measures of uncertainty. They're not probability theory. They're super useful, and we must use them in security. We use them in all kinds of emergency services. They're a great API for helping to direct our attention. We just need to use them for what they signed up for. It's when you use them for what they didn't sign up for that you
Fit for
start getting
purpose.
into trouble. Yeah,
That's right.
that's all it is. They're great.
And I think in addition to using the fit for purpose methods to the task, there's a theme of balanced analysis. And I think this is something that I try to bring, I think accounting does well in terms of, an audit or compliance. You got to learn to do well in compliance, is have that balanced perspective. People would agree with the findings, and or even making a business case. Frankly, it's not black and white. There's a lot of nuance that we're dealing with constantly. And there's various different methods here that are quantitative that are mentioned, but I think my favorite one is the Green Book, which we enumerated. And what's really exciting is that we're basically trying to moneyball cyber resilience. We're picking the right things, and it's going to make a big impact. So fine, though, but how do I do it? What's the first step? So the rapid audit was really cool, just starting simple on a quantitative basis in terms of annual expected loss, return on control. We've all seen that before. The decomposition of impacts was a little bit not something I'd done before. Here's how it looks. We're actually saying for this organization, enumerating the ransomware, business email compromise, the things that can go wrong, trying to say with 90% confidence and an upper and a lower bound, we're getting rangy here in helping navigate and present data to management to make decisions. The total bag of risk they're sitting on is $42 million, but on average, but the expected yearly loss is $1 million. That means that our residual risk is higher than our risk tolerance. And so we need to buy that down and how might we do it. So I don't know, that was a very cool first step to start being quantitative and to look at Monte Carlo simulation as a kind of a statistical approach in doing forecasting work. Any key items to add here, Richard, or to change or anything?
No, I really appreciate you bringing this up. These are free spreadsheets that are available on the howtomeasureanything.com/cybersecurity site, and these have been up there for almost a decade. They're a great start. There's a large, massive global consulting firm, common household name, that built their whole cybersecurity risk management practice on this spreadsheet.
Oh, cool.
They've obviously added, and I was in the UK and did a event that they hosted, and I didn't know this. They're like, oh yeah, our whole practice, and they're like got a certain majority of Fortune 500 customers on this now, and I was like, I didn't know that. That's cool. Why didn't I do that? I should have done that.
You made a ripple in a pond, man. So
the thing is this. I didn't. Well, they have a whole army of consultants. Like, why didn't I do that? I should. Where have I been? I should have developed a consulting practice on this. That's super cool. Yeah, this has been around, right? On Monte Carlos, by the way, it's kind of interesting. I'll see people, a lot of posts and contentiousness and curiosity about Monte Carlos, and I'm like, it's about as interesting as arithmetic. I just don't understand. People say, oh, those are. Actually, there's this one vendor. It was kind of odd. They're in the GRC, like CRQ space, and their people keep picking on Monte Carlos because I know they're trying to compete with FAIR. And I'm like, they call it an old method. I'm like, okay, well, arithmetic's super old. Do you want to pick on that too? I mean, Bayesian methods
on that, yeah.
Yeah, and, Bayesian methods are really old, like 250 plus years old. Would you like to pick on that too? Well, since we're going to use age, if you're going to say that you only use methods that are 5 years or older, well, then that excludes all math. I mean, it's just the Monte Carlos are for measuring the area under a curve. They're just not particularly interesting, and they're not hard. If you look at the spreadsheet, like, oh my gosh, why do people make a big deal of this? It's just, it's a way for doing integration that avoids some of the calculus. It's, instead of using an analytical method, you're just using this simulation thing, and it's as interesting as rocks.
And your example of what the Bayesian method was, I didn't know, with the pool table, and that every time, if I'm guessing the distance a cue will roll on a pool table or a ball, every new ball that comes out, I get more information and I update my model and my range with that. That was really cool.
Yeah, that for the audience as an object lesson in the Reverend Bayes' original article, which was published posthumously, he has a pool table example, and I decided just to make a simulation of that, and so the audience will actually fire up a game, and we actually play the Reverend Bayes' pool game. But it's a method of teaching people how to make forecasts about ranges, and then making forecasts about specific numbers, and then we add dollars, we add money to it, and turn it into a gambling game. It's a lot of fun. And in fact, we'll be playing this in Vegas. And the people I find out who are good are then going to go with me to the tables afterwards.
Might be higher stakes. That sounds fun.
Yeah.
Different kinds of curves. You can get more advanced with it. We're maturing our security metrics capabilities, and we have all of these sensors in our attack surface, not our risk surface yet, but our attack surface, our cloud, our on-prem, and our IoT networks. We have passive scans, APIs, network scans, agents, all this telemetry, and might be putting them into our data lake and our visualization, our business intelligence dashboard. But ultimately, we're trying to evolve from just attack surface to a broader risk surface. So I don't know if it's possible to do in 5 minutes, Richard, but I think to conclude, 5 or 10, whatever makes sense, but if you could maybe get into the presenting to the board and how it kind of puts everything all together with this risk operations center view here, and then how to make that presentation. Would that be okay?
Sure. And so to do the presentation, go down a little bit to the cards that you had there.
Okay.
A little further. That thing. Let's stop there. Okay. So just for the audience, one of the things that I do a lot of is I help people with board presentations. This is when I did the CISO Summit. That was my whole talk, although I used it as a means to talk about quantification. But for those of you who haven't had an opportunity to present to the board, I'm not recommending that you go and present loss exceedance curves, or not even counts of vulnerabilities or other things like that. Typically, for a board presentation, you're going to be presenting decisions to them that they are already pre-socialized to. So you're typically presenting decisions that you've made in conjunction with your peers that the board, through the pre-read or whatnot, already know about. And by the way, your spend, whatever budget you may have been exercising, perhaps it's a subset of someone else's budget, they've already been pre-socialized to that as well. So again, typically speaking, I'm going to share decisions that have been executed or being executed that they already know about. I'm not there to do religion. And by the way, I've never gone to a board presentation where I've asked them for anything. All right. Maybe that's been your experience. I personally don't know any CISOs who've gone to the board and asked for anything. Certainly, if I were to go to the board and ask for anything, they were already pre-socialized with the question I was going to ask. Okay. And I'm not getting out in front of my CEO. I'm not getting out in front of my CTO or GC and asking a question that would surprise them ever. All right.
Don't like drama.
So they don't like drama. They don't like drama. Don't use dramatic adjectives. All right. So, for example, if I were to be standing in front of the board, let's say without a slide, I might say, as you know, the business has been incredibly successful. There's been a huge infusion of capital. We've grown in this region. We've deployed into these cloud environments. We've done this M&A. And because of that success, naturally, there's been an increase in risk, more assets to cover, more people to secure, more processes to secure, et cetera. And there's been a many-fold increase, and I'm pointing to the CTO or CIO who are with me in the room, and they're nodding with me because we're already know what we're going to say. And with that, we've allocated much more spend to protect those environments. As you know, there's been the $2 million increase in capital, and also been working with with the GC or whoever the buyer of insurance is to make some changes for our upcoming cyber insurance renewal to address this risk. It's all within hand, all understood. Any questions? That's a 90-second presentation, and I'll walk away my first presentation to GE with Jeff Immelt when he was the The chairman was 90 seconds. So be prepared for a be brief and be gone. If you have more time, you
Be
might
brilliant. Be
share.
brief. Be brilliant. Be gone.
I don't even know. Do not try to impress them because they are unimpressible.
Fair.
All right. So that second layer where we have the metrics, that would be me working with my risk committee. Well, you say, what's a risk committee? A risk committee, that's where you see a risk arrival, risk removal, all that. If you do not have a risk committee, then it would be your job, CISO, to go form one. So that would include you or your deputy, your GC or their deputy, CFO or deputy, or other basically ETIM members, where you're meeting on a monthly basis to actually look at risk, right? And to ensure that you have a plan in place to keep risk within tolerance. By the way, it's that group that will work together to inform whatever gets presented to the board. I always talk about this idea of pre-socialization. There's nobody who's not socialized to what's going on, right? And so in that board meeting, you would perhaps show metrics. You could show, again, this is a group that you've formed or part of, where you say, hey, look, we've had a pretty massive increase in risk over the past several quarters because we were victims of our own success. You know, it's a good sign in that it tells us we are probably exposing more value to more people, et cetera. This is the rate with which it's increased, and this is why we can decompose that into various business units or whatnot. This is that risk committee. Unfortunately, if we're using metrics here, we've seen a slowdown in the rate with which we've removed risk. We can show you where that's occurring, the nature of that. And we've seen the amount of time with which this risk is sticking around. We consider it problematic. Here's what we're thinking about to bring that risk within tolerance, both in terms of how we spend on infrastructure, people, process, technology, and we might want to make some considerations in terms of risk transfer. And you're working at that level. You're not the only one, by the way. There will be other groups that'll talk about their risks, but you're working and you're going back to this idea of strategy. You're making trade-offs together, right? Again,
yes. It's a decision. We're there to navigate and make decisions, and it's always a trade-off. Right. I gotcha.
Right. So again, by the way, you could be negligent if you don't invest in controls. We're going to put it all in insurance. Listen, if you are after post breach, you're found to have you have protected the business through insurance, but you haven't protected the stakeholders called customers and the public. This is where you get into civil stuff and things like that. Again, going back to that model that I showed before, we talk about penalties and whatnot. We have to be thoughtful. This is where this group is really thinking about this as well. By the way, if you go down to the next one, I'm going to just go down a little further. Yep. Let's see. Let's see if you have the next one. Yeah, go further. A little further. There you go. So the one on the flare on the bottom. No. Go back up. Oh, this is fine. This works. So you have on the bottom, you have the business units, right? Be the revenue generating business units or other that you're dealing with. So again, you have a risk committee that's composed typically of these people. Maybe they're GMs or VPs who are responsible for groups, be it regional or functional, they're generating revenue, right, or exposing value. You're working with them as well. So not only are you working at the risk committee level, you're working at this level. That goes back again. You remember the first slide I have is that black and white slide of all the military folks looking at the board. This goes to the point that the job really, particularly with CISO, if you're exercising strategy, you are really socializing, working a lot with your peers, particularly with the operational peers and your revenue generating business unit peers, right? In understanding the strategy of the business, what the business is trying to do, so that you can have your finger on the pulse in terms of exposure, so you can bring risk back within tolerance. Again, this all leads to being able to go to a board presentation where you're talking about things that they already know about, right? Because you've worked at it already at the risk committee level. You've worked at it at the business unit level. So that's the purpose of these diagrams here, these cards. It's more of trying to get people in the right thought process. It is heavily communication oriented in the process, right? So I just want to make that clear. That's what, when it comes to the board, the luck favors the prepared, or really, it's really luck favors the prepared mind, right? And so when you want to be in a place where you have a successful board presentation, it's because you've done all of that work of working with establishing or working with your risk committee, working with the individual stakeholders. This is a majority of the time that you're spending as a leader doing this. And then your team, operational team, is then doing their job of, again, buying down that risk through capabilities. And it's your job to be measuring that, again, bringing that back to these things here, where you're communicating with the risk committee, you're communicating with the individuals, you're able to show where they're going in terms of risk from a measurement perspective, again, so that you can bring that risk back within tolerance as appropriate. So I know this is probably an epiphany of the obvious. Like I said, I do not invent anything. I'm just an observer of what goes on. And I would observe that the biggest failures, if you want to say what's the failure of a board presentation, it's preparedness. It's a lack of having relationship. When I say relationship, I'm not talking about bear hugs. I'm talking about meeting people in a structured sort of way, as I'm suggesting here. I'll stop there with that.
Well, no, I love it. I think there are a couple of things firing off in my brain. I mean, one, when you do the pre-work in the committee and the subcommittees leading up to the board, I don't go to the board, but I help her with the slides and I help with the subcommittees. The agenda to engage as the GRC team with the business owners is to say, this is our risk committee. And in addition to our agenda of talking about cyber risk and what's going on from our side, it's also your opportunity to make sure that to tell us how it's going, give us some feedback on these security things, but also we want to know how to protect and enable you. So what is going on with the business, right? And that's a key element of the risk committee. I do have one key question here, Richard, which is, are you picking one metric in each bucket? Are you aggregating some of them? I'm not. I feel like I might pick two or three. I don't know, but
yeah, these are high level, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, and this kind of ties back to our shameless plug, the Risk Operations Center. So Qualys, I work for Qualys. Enterprise True Risk Management is the platform name, but the Risk Operations Center. The idea is that so there's the enterprise level and then there's the portfolio level. If I'm working with a portfolio, I would be drilling into those metrics and showing them where we are, where it matters, into their crown jewels and whatnot. By the way, we are all the methods that I write about, we are implementing in the risk. So survival analysis, all that, arrival rates, all that stuff is being integrated in right now, and also the risk quantification stuff as well. So I know it's shameless plugging, but that's why I'm here. That's why I was hired in part. But the idea is, if I'm
generally interested to understand how this works. I mean,
yeah.
Didn't bring you here for a vendor presentation, but I wanted to include this because views are expressed on my own, and et cetera. I'm really interested in how to either pick the most important metrics or to aggregate it up somehow, and even in aggregating how a tool like this would help in that process.
Yeah. Well, again, I don't know if you can see the time series in the bottom there, but the idea is that you have, look at this company. It's and this is just an example, right? But they're very. Someone say, oh, they look really risky. I'd say, oh, that might be because they're super successful. I mean, what do you mean? Well, typically when you see an exponential growth in risk, it's typically because you have a business that is deploying more people, process, technology. They're doing stuff, and so risk is going to, they're going to excrete risk. Now, the problem is, it would look like this. They don't have any scale in their capabilities, meaning there's a volumetric just looking at this graph here, there's a volumetric increase in risk, and their capabilities aren't keeping up in terms of their, their orchestration, in terms of patching, in terms of mitigation, control, and other things like that. It would seem like there might be a problem, and I'd want to drill into this. Like to the right, we have looks like we have the crown jewels on our business entities and the crown jewels. I'd want to drill in and see if there's any cross-cutting risk, shared infrastructure, and/or there are individual places that are really creating problems. And so this is me. So this is an enterprise card. I'd be working with the business leaders, right, to understand, hey, where can we get some operational efficiency and capital efficiency in buying down that risk and getting that curve over time within our risk tolerance. That's all this is. And this is motherhood and apple pie, right? This is what we're expecting to do. The only thing is that what we're doing, I suppose, that might be a little different than other people who are doing, some form of continuous threat and exposure management is, the advanced metrics, as I've already explained, but also bringing in, insurance data and other things like that to say, hey, what is, the plausibility of having losses? What is the likelihoods, given what we know about claims rates and things like that? How can we use that information to further make you better, help you make better, more timely, or economically efficient decisions, again, to keep risk within tolerance, including eventually where we're going, because that's what I want, chief risk, recovering chief risk officer as well. How can we help the CISO start having these conversations with their business partners under the, the risk managers under the CFO or in ERM, and say, hey, look, we're such a successful business. I got this residual risk. that just continues growing. There continues to grow. There's things that we can't patch for reasons. There's things we can't mitigate for reasons. When looking at what we can do to make the business more resilient, it looks like we might want to do some more transfer here. We'd like to look at how we can do some, perhaps some policy changes. This is where it is. This is why we want to do this. So working with your risk managers to make some purchases to, basically increase your limits. This is something that, we, particularly now, I don't know if you know this in insurance, we're in a soft market. The insurance markets have a lot of capacity. They've got a dry powder they want to move. I won't say who, but I was on with a large reinsurer even today, where we're talking about these things, where they have all this capacity that they want to move. Well, one of the purposes of our platform is to start helping the CISO be a strategic player, making the trade-offs between control, insurance. We know help the CFO
Not the
think about
CFO.
capital
Interesting.
reserves. Yeah, the CFO. Yeah, well, no. The CISO to work with.
Yeah.
CISOs are buyers typically of a product, to help them be a partner with the CFO to say, hey, look.
Because the CFO doesn't know the residual risk.
Which is odd because they're the buyers of insurance. Well, that's because they're trusting they have contract buyers called risk managers. The contract buyers, their job description is get low premium, lots of limit. Cheap premium, lots of limit, which is easy now with the soft market. But they're not looking at the residual risk within the business at all, by the way. They may think they are. The brokers may say, oh, here's the spreadsheet, fill it out. No, the person who knows this, the person who has their finger on the pulse, absolutely is a CISO org, right? And so how can our job is to give people a platform that helps them with a lot of ground truth, start thinking through this thing when we're starting to incorporate more data from an insurance perspective in this as well. And this is only normal. So we call it, this is a CTEM is a Gartner term, continuous threat and exposure management. We're really saying, well, what we're doing is the money-minded CTEM. How can we help you be capitally and operationally efficient? How can we help you, reach across the organization to keep your business resilient, plausible future loss? And how can we help you be capitally and operationally efficient in buying down that risk through automation, through orchestration, to bring that risk within tolerance, to really do that, right? That's where the world is. We're not the only ones that are thinking about this stuff. We're just a little further along than others because our CEO made a crazy idea and hired someone like me who thinks like he does. I mean, it's his vision, but I totally align with that. That's what we're doing.
Richard, this is just so fascinating for me personally to see the worlds of finance and cybersecurity converging, and it makes sense, and it's happening, and the future is now. It's very interesting. But then zooming out to just generally the Simply Cyber community and people that want to launch and lift their careers, maybe with a focus on GRC. Do you have any final advice or helpful tips to use cyber risk quantification to make an impact?
Sure. So earlier on, we talked about, there's GRC, that's the term, then you had Gartner come up with the term IRM. It's finally, I think, starting to get some legs, but it was just a recognition of kind of what we're talking about here, this integrated nature of cyber with insurance and other, again, Gartner was making an observation of what's already going on. They invented a term that's trying to reflect what's going on. So for us, we did not invent this term. Risk Operations Center is a term that's existed for a while. But the idea, I believe the career is now, call it the risk engineering career, if you like. That's very AI, integrated, right? We're looking at massive amounts of data where a lot of that orchestration is agentic AI, but that role, that person that's in the middle of this, call them a risk engineer, fits within the concept of a risk operations center, where you're looking at this scaled out platform, AI enabled. By the way, saying AI, eventually AI is going to be like saying I use a database. Like, okay. So, and I'm bipedal, right? It's like, okay, but for now we have to say it, right? But the reality is that the Risk Operations Center is where we're really pushing the conversation, where it is the intermix of the GRC with the vuln, with the threat, with identity and all that stuff, but landing all that telemetry in a place. End vendor, by the way, but the Risk Operations Center is a practice and platform, the modern practice and platform for managing your risk more holistically. And so I'd say for the careerists out there, I'd encourage you to pay attention to this. Follow me on LinkedIn if you're not already. And if you're coming to Black Hat, please come to my talk or come by and see us at the booth. We'll I'm sure we'll have some tchotchkes there. I'll be doing a book signing after my talk of the book too, after the keynote. And come learn about this. We'd love to have it. Look, we invent these things together, right? And so having conversations with the likes of your audience would be key for us. And we'd look forward to doing more of that.
Awesome, dude. Thank you so much. It's been so insightful. I've learned a lot. And I've been inspired. And I look forward to seeing you next time, Richard.
All right. Good luck.